Have you ever had a dream so clear you could almost feel the dirt under your fingernails and smell the rain on the pavement? A dream that felt more real than the world around you. My name is Leo, and at 27 years old, that dream was my entire world. I live in a small, hard-working town just a stone's throw from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, place of rolling green hills, old steel town grit, and quiet, tree-lined streets. It's the kind of place where most of the guys I grew up with took the expected path. They packed their bags for college, chased degrees, and settled into the steady, air-conditioned rhythm of office life. But that was never my rhythm. My heart beats to the sound of a two-stroke engine and the satisfying snip of pruning shears. I've always been a guy who needs to work with his hands, to see the tangible results of a day's labor. My grandfather was the same way. His backyard garden was my sanctuary as a kid, a small, perfect world of sprawling tomato vines and neat rows of marigolds. He taught me that there's a unique kind of pride in nurturing something, in turning chaos into order with nothing but your own two hands and a bit of sweat. So, for 6 long years after high school, while my friends were navigating campus life, I was navigating a different course. I worked odd jobs stocking shelves at the grocery store, bussing tables at the local dinner, and I saved every single penny. I spent my free time devouring everything I could about horticulture, turf management, and landscape design. My passion wasn't just a hobby, it was a blueprint for my future, owning my own lawn care and landscaping business. A few months ago, that blueprint finally started to become a reality. It wasn't anything glamorous, mind you. My company, which I decided to call Grounded Skates, consisted of me and a fleet of well-worn equipment. I had an old white Ford pickup, Old Bessie, that greeted every morning with a rumbling cough and a groan. My primary mower was a second-hand machine I'd tinkered with myself, and my arsenal was rounded out by a couple of string trimmers and one of the cheapest leaf blowers money could buy. But they got the job done, and that's what mattered. I even designed and printed my own flyers, the logo a little crooked, the font a bit plain, and walked for miles, leaving them in mailboxes and on community bulletin boards all over town. At first, my client base was modest. It was mostly my mom, a few aunts and uncles who felt obligated, and a couple of kindly next-door neighbors. It was hardly a living. Honestly, most of the work was done for free or in exchange for a home-cooked meal. I knew that building a reputation, a real one, would take time. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, doubt would creep in. One drizzly afternoon, I was sitting at my wobbly kitchen table, the air thick with the smell of oil and brass clippings, cleaning my tools and wondering if I ever land a client who wasn't related to me. I was starting to question if my dream was just thought a dream. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Hello." A voice came through, calm and measured, with a warmth that felt like old money, but without the frost. "Hello. My neighbor gave me your number. I'm looking for someone to take care of my lawn. Are you available?" I sat up straight, my heart giving a sudden, hopeful thump. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I could stop by tomorrow to take a look, if that works for you." She gave me the address, and after we hung up, I just stared at the phone for a long moment. This was it. My first real gig. The next morning, I loaded my gear into Old Bessie, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, and drove to the address she'd given me. As I pulled up, I couldn't believe my eyes. The house was magnificent, nestled in one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in the county. It was luxurious but tasteful, with a sprawling, immaculate garden where even a single overgrown blade of grass would stand out like a sore thumb. I parked across the street, took a deep breath, and gave myself a little pep talk. Okay, Leo. Be cool. Be professional. I walked up the stone pathway and rang the bell. A few moments later, the heavy oak door swung open. I still remember the first time I saw her. She looked to be in her early 40s, tall and elegant, dressed simply in a way that spoke of an easy confidence that didn't need to try too hard. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and she wore small, simple earrings. She had almost no makeup on, save for a touch of lipstick. "Hi, I'm Clara," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "You must be Leo." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for calling me." She smiled gently. "No need for ma'am. Just Clara is fine." She led me around the property, pointing out the areas she wanted mowed and tidied up. She mentioned that the last guy she hired had simply stopped showing up, and that she valued consistency and neatness above all else. I nodded, listening intently, my mind already cataloging the work that needed to be done. "I'll make sure it looks better than it ever has," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "I can start right away." The heat that day was relentless, and within an hour, my t-shirt was soaked through with sweat. The mower whined a little as I pushed it up the slight incline of her front lawn, but it held strong. I mowed, I edged, and I made sure every line was perfectly crisp. I even took the time to hand-pull the weeds growing between the stones of her walkway, something she hadn't even asked for. At one point, I glanced up and saw her standing on the porch, watching me work. I gave a shy wave and got right back to it. About an hour later, as I was finishing up the last patch of lawn by the side yard, she walked out to meet me. I cut the engine on the mower and used my sleeve to wipe the sweat from my brow. "It looks wonderful," she said, her eyes scanning the yard. "You really have an eye for detail." "Thank you," I managed to say, catching my breath. I tried to treat every lawn as if it were my own. She tilted her head, a playful, knowing smile touching her lips, and said something I'll never forget. "Be careful. I get attached to people who work this hard." I let out a surprised laugh, unsure if she was serious or just teasing. "I'll keep that in mind," one replied. She smiled again. "I'll send the payment through your website, but you'll definitely be hearing from me again soon." I packed up my gear, gave her a wave, and drove off, my chest filled with a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. Hope. A real, solid sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, this was all going to work out. For the next 3 days, I was back to the grind, helping a friend with some odd jobs, trimming hedges for a neighbor, pulling weeds by hand where I could. I was still hustling for any work I could get. Every night, I'd check my phone, hoping for a new message, but there was nothing. I tried not to let it get me down. "You're just starting out," I kept telling myself. "Keep pushing." Then, on Thursday morning, my phone rang. It was her. "Clara." I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Hello." "Hi, Leo. It's Clara." I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all. How can I help you? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was wondering if you could stop by again. The hedges and shrubs along the fence line are looking a bit wild. It seems no one has pruned them properly in ages. And I was so impressed with how you handled the lawn. Is that something you could help with? Of course, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I can be there this afternoon, if you're free. That's perfect. Then, after we hung up, I found myself staring at my phone again. This wasn't a one-time thing. I had a repeat customer. And not just any customer, a good one. I loaded up my tools and hit the road. As I pulled into her driveway, I couldn't help but notice how pristine everything looked, except for the overgrown hedges that framed the property. I grabbed my trimmer and got straight to work. The hedges were tall and dense, clearly neglected for months before my last visit. This wasn't just about a paycheck for me. I wanted to impress her again. I was building a reputation, one perfectly trimmed hedge at a time. About 40 minutes in, I saw Clara standing nearby, her arms crossed, watching me quietly. She was in simple workout clothes, her hair pulled back, looking effortlessly put together. "You're very meticulous," she observed as I stepped back to check my lines. "In this business," one reply, "the details are everything." She smiled. Not everyone sees it that way. We chatted for a few minutes while I continued to work. Nothing deep. Just small talk about the neighborhood and how hard it was to find good help. I found her incredibly easy to talk to, and she seemed completely at ease. I focused on the hedges, carefully shaping each one. When I finished the last bush, she walked over, a look of genuine delight on her face. "Leo, you've done it again. They look even better than I imagined." I smiled, a surge of pride warming my chest. "Thank you, Clara. I'm glad you're happy with it." Then she paused, hesitating for just a moment before she asked, "I know this is a bit forward, but I made far too much for dinner. Would you want to stay and have some? It's just a thank you. You must be hungry after working in this heat." I blinked, taken by surprise. Clients didn't normally invite me in for dinner. I hesitated, unsure how to respond, but her smile was so warm and disarming, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'd love to," I said, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," she said with a wave of her hand. "It's just dinner. Come on. You've earned a break." There was something in the way she said it that made me feel instantly more comfortable. I nodded. "Okay. Thank you." I packed up my tools and followed her inside. Her home was as beautiful on the inside as it was on the out. Modern, elegant, yet somehow cozy, with large windows that filled the space with soft, natural light. Clara led me to the kitchen, where the dining table was already set for two. She'd made grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread. The aroma was incredible. We sat down and started to eat. The conversation flowed more easily than I could have imagined. She asked me about my business, how I got started, and what my goals were. I was honest with her. I told her I was barely breaking even, still using borrowed tools, and dreaming of the day I could afford a real work truck with a company logo, and maybe even a small crew. "You're driven," she said with a smile. "That's rare in most people your age." I shrug, feeling a little embarrassed. "I'm just trying to build something of my own." After dinner, she opened a bottle of wine and offered me a glass. I politely declined, saying I had to drive home. She nodded. I respect that. Not everyone would say no. We sat for a little while longer, just talking. It felt strange, but not in a bad way. There was no pressure, just a comfortable ease between two people from very different worlds. As the sun began to set, I stood up and thanked her. "Thank you for everything, Clara. Really." She smiled and walked me to the door. "I have a feeling you'll be finding plenty more things around here for you to fix," she joked gently. I laughed. "I look forward to it." That night, as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about how strange the day had been. I didn't know what any of it meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, my life was about to change in ways I couldn't possibly foresee. The next few weeks fell into a steady rhythm. I was still working myself to the bone, taking every job I could find, working from sunrise to sunset most days. But now, thanks to Clara's referrals, I had picked up a few more clients in her affluent neighborhood. Word travels fast in a place like that, and people were impressed with my attention to detail. I was grateful, even if the work left me exhausted most nights. Then, on a Friday afternoon, as I was finishing up a hedge job down the street, my phone rang. It was Clara. "Hi Leo. Are you free tomorrow?" I wiped the sweat from my forehead and smiled. "I think I can be. What's on your mind?" "My back patio is a bit of a disaster. The garden beds are overgrown, and I know you'll make it look perfect." I agreed without a second thought. Clara was quickly becoming not just my best-paying client, but also my most dependable. And honestly, it would be a lie to say I didn't look forward to working at her place. There was something peaceful about her home, about her presence. The next morning, I loaded up my gear and headed over. When I pulled up, she was standing on her front step, smiling and waving. She was wearing simple jeans and a crisp white shirt, effortlessly chic as always. "Good morning, Leo," she called out. "Morning, Clara. Where should I start?" I asked. She led me around to the back. It was a large, beautifully designed space, but it was definitely in need of some attention. The shrubs were overgrown, flower beds were a chaotic mess, and weeds were creeping up through the paved walkway. "I know it's a lot," she admitted with a small laugh. "Take your time. I'll be inside if you need anything." I got right to it. The sun was high and fierce, and soon sweat was pouring down my back. I pruned, I weeded, I edged, and I slowly transformed the space. Hours passed in a focused blur. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of Clara watching from the kitchen window, or she'd come out with a glass of ice-cold water. "Come on, Leo," she insisted at one point, holding out a glass. "Even the hardest workers need a break." I finally relented, sinking onto the back steps and sipping the cool water while I surveyed the half-finished yard. Clara sat down beside me. "You're really committed to this," she said quietly. I nodded. It's my name on the business. I want people to remember me for doing a good job. She smiled. Oh, you're definitely making a name for yourself. I finished the job just as evening began to cool the air. When I stepped back to look at the whole thing, even I had to admit the difference was stunning. The hedges were clean and sharp. The flower beds were neatly defined, and not a single weed was in sight. It looked like a brand new backyard. Clara came out and gasped. Leo, this is beautiful. You've truly outdone yourself. I pulled off my gloves, wiping the dirt from my hands. Thank you. I'm glad you like it. Then, she paused, as if she were considering something. Listen, she said. I know this is unconventional, but would you want to stay for dinner again? I'm the only one here, and I always make too much. Consider it a small thank you. I hesitated again, caught off guard just like before. But there was such an easy, sincere quality to her voice. All right, I said after a moment. Thank you. I packed up my tools and followed her inside. The house felt different in the soft glow of the evening light, softer, warmer, more inviting. Soft music drifted from speakers somewhere in the living room, and the smell of roasted chicken once again filled the air. As we sat at the kitchen table, the conversation picked up right where we had left off. I told her about growing up, about how my dad had taught me the value of working with my hands, and how I'd always dreamed of having a place of my own one day. Clara listened intently, nodding and asking thoughtful questions. It didn't feel like an interview. It felt like two people genuinely getting to know each other. You're very brave. You know, she said at one point. Most people wouldn't take a risk like this. I laughed. I'm not sure if it's bravery or just stubbornness. After dinner, she opened a bottle of wine. I know you don't drink when you're driving, she said with a mischievous smile, but I'm having a glass anyway. It was getting late when Ashley stood up to leave. As she walked me to the door, she stopped me for a moment, placing a light hand on my arm. I've been thinking, she said, looking me directly in the eye. You don't have to say yes to this, but I've been considering investing in your business. I see how much this means to you. I believe in what you're building. I was stunned into silence. I don't know what to say. Clara, that's incredibly generous, but I don't know if I can accept. She smiled kindly. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. I want to help. I stood there, my mind reeling. No one had ever offered me that kind of support before. I nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Thank you, Clara. Of course, she said softly. Good night, Leo. I walked to my truck, my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to say no out of sheer pride. I had built this thing from nothing. But another part of me knew this could be the turning point. New tools, a better truck, bigger jobs. I drove home in silence, her offer weighing heavily on my heart. The next few days were some of the hardest I'd faced since starting my business. I could barely sleep. My mind was a constant battlefield of pride versus pragmatism. On one hand, every dollar I'd earned felt sacred because I had bled and sweat for it. On the other, Clara's offer was a lifeline, a chance to leapfrog years of struggle overnight. By Wednesday, I knew I had to talk to her. I called and asked if I could stop by. "Of course," she said, her voice as warm as ever. "I'll be home all afternoon." I parked Old Bessie in its usual spot and walked to her door, my heart heavy with the weight of my decision. Clara opened the door with a knowing smile. "Hide, Leo." "Hide, Clara." She led me to the kitchen, and we sat at the table. The air was relaxed, but I could tell she sensed the seriousness of the conversation to come. "I've been thinking about what you said," I started, "and I just want to thank you again. No one has ever believed in me like that. Not even my own family. Really." She just nodded, letting me speak. "I'll accept," I said, the words feeling momentous. "But only if we treat it as a loan. I can't accept a handout. I will pay back every single dollar, with interest." Clara's smile softened. "I respect that, Leo. Honestly, I wouldn't have expected anything less from you." We shook hands across the table, and in that moment, something shifted. This was more than just business. It wasn't romantic, either. It was something in between, a partnership built on mutual respect and a quiet, unspoken understanding. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Clara transferred the funds, and I didn't waste a single day. I bought a newer, more reliable truck and had my company logo professionally painted on the side. I upgraded all of my equipment, and with the better tools, I was able to take on bigger, higher-paying jobs. I even hired my first part-time employee, a high school kid from my neighborhood. The business grew faster than I ever could have hoped. By the end of the season, I had a full roster of regular clients and was booked out for weeks in advance. Word had spread. I was no longer just the kid with an old mower. I was running a real company. Clara remained one of my best clients. And sometimes, after I'd finished a job at her place, we would sit on her back porch, drinking iced tea and talking about life as the sun set behind her perfectly manicured yard. I held up my end of the bargain, making monthly payments on the loan. Clara never asked about the money, never pressured me, but I made sure to stick to the schedule we'd agreed upon. Our relationship stayed exactly as it was, friendly, professional, and refreshingly uncomplicated. By the end of that year, my business had grown beyond what I had imagined possible when I first started. I was finally making a real living, with enough set aside to start thinking about buying a small house of my own. One afternoon, after finishing my 50th job at Clara's place, she came out as I was loading my tools. "You really did it, Leo," she said, her voice filled with genuine pride. "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. She smiled. "You would have gotten here eventually. I just gave you a little push." I laughed. Well, it was the best push I could have ever hoped for. We shook hands again. "I'll still be calling you to do my lawn," she teased. "I wouldn't have it any other way," I said with a grin. As I drove away that day, I realized a chapter of my life had come to a perfect close. I had built something real, something solid. The kid who started with a rusty mower was now a respected small business owner. And Clarash would always be the one who came into my life at just the right moment and helped me believe in myself when I needed it most. Another year passed. Grounded Skates was no longer a fledgling dream. It was a thriving, respected local business with a small, dedicated crew and a fleet of trucks. The long days were still there, but now they were filled with the satisfaction of success, not the anxiety of survival. The most significant change, however, was personal. I had finally done it. After years of saving and months of searching, I had put a down payment on a small house of my own, a modest bungalow on a quiet street, with good bones and, most importantly, a yard that was a complete disaster. It was perfect. It was late autumn, and the air was crisp with the promise of winter. I was at Clara's for what would likely be the last major cleanup of the season. The work felt different, this time less like a job and more like a visit with an old friend. As I packed up the leaf blower, she came out onto the porch, a steaming mug in each hand. "Hot cider," she said, handing one to me. "You look like you could use it." "Thanks, Clara," I said, the warmth of the mug seeping into my cold hands. We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, watching the last of the golden leaves drift down onto the lawn I had just cleared. "So," I began, a nervous excitement bubbling up inside me, "I have some news. I bought a house." Clara's face broke into a wide, brilliant smile. It wasn't just a polite smile. It was one of pure, unadulterated pride. "Leo, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you." "I wanted to tell you in person," I continued, reaching into my truck's glove compartment and pulling out an envelope. "And I wanted to give you this." I handed it to her. Inside was a check for the final payment on the loan, with the full interest, exactly as we had agreed. She took the envelope but didn't open it. Her eyes were still on me. "You didn't have to rush this, you know." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to. Closing this loop, it feels right." I took a deep breath. "Clara, thank you. Not just for the money. Thank you for believing in a guy with a rusty mower and a crooked flyer." She set her mug down on the railing and stepped forward, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "Leo, the belief was the easy part. You had the heart and the grit all along. All I did was help you buy a better shovel." We both laughed. In that moment, our unique, unlabelable relationship felt perfectly clear. She was more than a client, more than a mentor. She was the catalyst, the person who saw the potential and decided to add water. As I got into my truck to leave, she called out one last time, "Don't think this gets you out of doing my lawn next spring." I grinned back at her. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Driving away from her perfectly manicured home, I wasn't heading back to my parents' house or a cramped apartment. I was heading to my own home. To my own messy, promising, weed-filled yard. And I couldn't wait to get my hands dirty.